Hi, I'm Ben,
I'm Kyle.
I'm Katie.
and today we'll be talking to you about Jim Crow laws. So to begin, we'll provide a little bit of overview about what Jim Crow laws actually were. So Jim Crow laws were state and local laws primarily in the southern United States that legalized racial segregation and furthered black oppression. They institutionalized economic, social, and educational disadvantages for African Americans. And they began after the Civil War in the 1870s and continued until as late as 1965.
So I just wanted to give you some background about the Reconstruction era, which was from 1865 to 1877. The Civil War ended in 1865, and then Reconstruction was when we tried to bring the Union back together. There were some important constitutional amendments passed during this time, including the 13th, 14th, and 15th. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery. The 14th gave citizenship rights, equal protection under law, and due process to the former slaves. And the 15th said that voting rights could not be denied based on race, so the former slaves could now vote. Some more background about Reconstruction. The Freedmen's Bureau was established to help former slaves and poor whites in the South with food, housing, medical aid, legal assistance, and education. They did a lot of good things like establishing hospitals and schools and help bring back a war-torn place. Unfortunately, they did not get the funding or support they needed from the government and folded just a few years after it began. Things did get a little better for the former slaves immediately at the beginning of Reconstruction. There were some political office holders in the South who were black, but troops were removed from southern states in 1877 and full power was returned to those states, so things quickly got worse again for the former slaves.
Plessy versus Ferguson was a court case that challenged the law that black and white people could not ride together on the railroad. Plessy was an African American who refused to ride in the colored car, and they took this to the Supreme Court where they ruled that separate but equal public facilities were constitutional. So these facilities that they had separate ones for were included prisons, hospitals, schools and colleges, buses, trains, drinking fountains, waiting rooms, restaurants, and the like. For voting, they passed laws that limited the voting power of blacks. They limited the voting right to those who owned property. They issued literacy tests and grandfather clauses, created poll taxes, and used intimidation of those who did show up. Grandfather clauses were when they couldn't, the 17th Amendment said that you couldn't discriminate who could vote based on race, and then they used all these other ones to limit it because not many had the right beforehand anyway.
Okay, and then finally, the significance of the Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow laws were yet another way that the United States aimed to express white superiority over black people, even with slavery outlawed. So obviously, these feelings of white superiority were established with slavery, with the beginning of the United States, and they were kind of furthered, and they were new ways in which blacks were oppressed. These laws also led to the increased civil disobedience by black Americans. So an example of this would be Rosa Parks in 1955 during her bus boycott, where she refused to give up her seat for a white man when she was sitting in the white section of the bus. And this civil disobedience by black Americans led to the civil rights movement of the 1950s and the 1960s, where civil rights leaders such as Martin Luther King and Malcolm X kind of made a name for themselves and expressed their frustration with the laws in the United States. And then finally, this kind of all came to a head with the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. These both kind of deterred discrimination and allowed kind of a voice for everyone in the United States and not just white men. And it aimed to give rights to women, black Americans, and minorities just overall. And they were signed into law by President Lyndon Johnson. So now we have a video from Representative John Lewis talking about his experience with the Jim Crow law era and how far we've come as a country since then.
I grew up in rural Alabama, about 50 miles from Montgomery, outside of a little place called Troy. We would visit the little town of Troy, visit Tuskegee, where Tuskegee University is located, visit Montgomery, 50 miles away. I saw those signs that said white men, colored men, white women, colored women, white waiting, colored waiting. We would go to the theater. All of us little black children had to go upstairs to the balcony. All the little white children went downstairs to the first floor. I would come home and ask my mother, my father, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, why? Why? They would say, that's the way it is. Don't get in trouble. Don't get in the way. In 1956, when I was 16 years old, with some of my brothers and sisters and first cousins, we went down to the public library, trying to check out some books. And the librarian told us that the library was for whites only and not for coloreds. So I never went back to the Pike County Public Library in downtown Troy, Alabama, until July 5th, 1998, for a book signing of my book, Walking with the Wind. And I was in the Congress by then. I signed a lot of books. A lot of people showed up, blacks and whites. At the end of the program, at the end of the book signing, they gave me a library card. It says something about the distance we've come and the progress we've made in America.
Okay, so like John Lewis notes here, this video kind of signifies how far we've come as a country since Jim Crow laws, but it also shows that we're not that far removed from Jim Crow laws and from the segregation and from these hateful feelings, and it shows that we're not completely away from them too. While it's not really instituted in our laws anymore, obviously the people, if John Lewis is still alive, the people who believe in Jim Crow are still alive, and have these feelings. So we're not completely out of the woods, but it shows the progress that we've made.